The Falcon Lake Incident, Canada's most documented UFO case, a prospector encounters a landed craft in the Manitoba wilderness and receives burns that baffle physicians for 17 years. Long before the phenomenon becomes common discourse, before governments acknowledge unidentified aerial objects as matters of national security, one encounter in the Canadian wilderness produces physical evidence that medical science cannot explain. The date is May 20, 1967. The location is Falcon Lake, Manitoba, deep in the ancient rock formations of the Canadian Shield. What transpires over the course of several hours on this spring day becomes the most extensively documented case of physical injury attributed to an unidentified aerial phenomenon in Canadian history. Stefan Michalak is 51 years old, a Polish-born industrial mechanic who has built a life in Canada through precision and practical skill. His weekend hobby reflects the same methodical temperament that serves him in his profession. He prospects for quartz and silver in the rocky terrain surrounding Falcon Lake, carrying his geological hammer, compass, and notepad into areas where few others venture. On this particular Saturday morning, he works alone among the outcroppings and pine forests, searching the exposed rock for mineral veins worth documenting. The time is approximately noon. Michalak chips at a quartz vein when a disturbance in the air causes him to look upward. What he observes defies his understanding of aircraft or natural phenomena. Two elongated disc-shaped objects descend through the clear sky, glowing with a reddish hue that shifts to gray as they approach the ground. The objects emit no sound that reaches his position. They move with controlled precision, lowering themselves toward the rocky terrain approximately 160 feet from where Michalak crouches near his work site. The first object hovers briefly, then ascends and disappears into the distance. The second settles onto the rock surface and remains stationary. Michalak watches from his concealed position, his initial fear giving way to intense curiosity. For approximately 30 minutes, the craft rests on the ground. Michalak uses this time to sketch what he observes in his notepad, recording details with the same care he applies to his geological specimens. The object appears smooth, approximately 40 feet in diameter, dome-shaped with a flat bottom. Its surface reflects the afternoon light with a peculiar luminescence, shifting between silver and purple hues. As the minutes pass without threatening movement from the craft, Michalak's professional curiosity overcomes his caution. He approaches slowly, moving across the rocky ground until he stands within arm's reach of the object. The surface radiates heat. He can feel it against his exposed skin even before physical contact. The craft appears constructed of a material unlike any metal or alloy he has encountered in his industrial work. When he reaches out and touches the surface, he discovers it is hot enough that his rubber-lined glove begins to melt. Then a panel opens in the side of the craft facing him. Light pours from the opening, a brilliance composed of 3 distinct colors arranged in geometric patterns. Michalak peers into the opening, attempting to discern the interior structure. He calls out greetings in English, then in Russian, Polish, German, Italian, Ukrainian, and French, thinking perhaps he has encountered some experimental aircraft whose operators might respond to one of these languages. No response comes. Only the lights continue their silent display, and vapor or gas flows from the opening, carrying an odor of sulfur and heated metal. Michalak leans closer to the opening, trying to see past the brilliant lights into whatever chamber or mechanism lies beyond. The vapor intensifies. His eyes begin to burn. The protective goggles he wears for his geological work fog instantly. He steps back, momentarily blinded by the combination of brilliant light and chemical vapor. As he retreats, the panel closes with no visible seam to mark its location. The craft's surface appears once again unbroken and featureless. What happens next occurs in seconds, but produces consequences that extend across decades. The craft shifts position, rotating on its axis. A section of the side panel, composed of a grid-like pattern of small circular openings arranged in neat rows, rotates directly toward Mikolak's position. Before he can move away, a blast of intensely hot gas or exhaust erupts from these grid openings. The force of the discharge strikes his chest, and his clothing immediately ignites. Pain sears across his torso. Mikolak tears at his shirt and undershirt, ripping the burning fabric away from his skin. The craft rises from the ground with a rush of air, ascending through the same opening in the forest canopy through which it descended. In moments, it disappears from view, leaving Mikolak alone in the clearing with his burned chest and the smoking remnants of his shirt lying on the rocks. When Mikolak examines what remains of his clothing, he discovers a pattern burned through the fabric. The burn matches exactly the grid of circular openings he observed on the craft's surface. Neat rows of holes, each precisely positioned, create a pattern too regular to be accidental. When he looks at his chest, he sees the same pattern burned into his flesh. The grid work of the exhaust vent has branded him with geometric precision. The immediate aftermath becomes a struggle for survival. Mikolak feels nausea rising. His head pounds. The burning sensation across his chest intensifies rather than fading. He attempts to navigate back to the highway where he parked his vehicle, but the network of unmarked trails confuses him. He becomes lost in the bush, wandering for hours while his symptoms worsen. He vomits repeatedly. Sweat pours from his body despite the moderate temperature. The forest seems to shift around him, familiar landmarks becoming strange and unreachable. Eventually, after hours of difficult navigation, Mikolak finds his way to the highway and drives himself back toward Winnipeg. He stops at the Falcon Lake Motor Hotel, seeking help, but the staff can offer little assistance beyond basic first aid. He continues driving, reaching his home in Winnipeg that evening. His son finds him in severe distress. The decision is made to seek immediate medical attention. At Misericordia Hospital, physicians examine the burns on Mikolak's chest. They document what they observe with careful notation. The pattern is unlike any burn injury in their experience. The precision of the marks, the regular spacing, the uniform depth of each circular burn within the overall grid suggests contact with a manufactured object of exact specifications. But Mikolak's description of how he received these burns challenges their medical understanding. Still, they cannot dispute what they observe on his chest. The evidence is physical, measurable, photographable. Over the following days and weeks, Mikolak's condition deteriorates in ways that perplex his medical caregivers. He experiences severe nausea and vomiting that persists beyond what his initial injuries would suggest. His lymph nodes swell. He loses weight rapidly, approximately 22 pounds over 7 weeks. A burning sensation spreads across his body in waves, appearing and receding without pattern. Blood tests show abnormalities. His white blood cell count fluctuates in ways that concern his physicians. Most disturbing is the behavior of the chest burns themselves. The grid pattern heals, then reappears weeks later without new injury. The burns seem to recur spontaneously, emerging on his skin in the exact same pattern, then fading again. This cyclical appearance and disappearance continues for months. Physicians document each recurrence, but can offer no explanation rooted in conventional medical understanding. The symptom profile becomes increasingly consistent with radiation exposure, though Mikolak had no known contact with radioactive materials in his work or daily life. While Mikolak struggles with his mysterious illness, investigators begin examining his claims. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police interview him extensively. Officers from Canadian Forces stationed Falcon conduct their own investigation. Health and Welfare Canada becomes involved due to the radiation exposure concerns. The Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, a civilian research group, sends investigators to document the case. The search for the landing site becomes a priority. Mikolak's initial attempts to relocate the exact spot prove difficult. The unmarked trails and dense forest areas near Falcon Lake create navigation challenges, especially for someone still recovering from severe illness. But eventually, he guides investigators to a clearing that matches his description. What they find corroborates his account in specific, measurable ways. The vegetation shows clear evidence of disturbance. A semicircular area displays broken and flattened plants consistent with the landing footprint Michalak described. More significantly, radiation readings at the site measure higher than background levels in the surrounding area. The pattern of elevated readings corresponds to the shape and position of the craft as Michalak sketched it in his notes made during the encounter. Soil samples taken from the site reveal silica that has been subjected to intense heat, sufficient to cause fusion. The temperatures required to produce such changes in soil composition exceed anything a simple brush fire or conventional source could generate. Multiple visits to the site over subsequent years confirm these findings. The physical evidence persists, measurable and documented through proper scientific protocols. The Canadian government's multi-agency investigation produces extensive documentation. Freedom of information requests filed in later years reveal the extent of official concern and analysis. Files from various governmental departments show that authorities took the case seriously, conducting thorough investigations and struggling to find conventional explanations for the physical evidence. The documentation includes medical reports, site analysis, radiation readings, soil composition studies, and extensive witness interviews. Michalak's medical ordeal continues for years beyond the initial encounter. He seeks evaluation at the Mayo Clinic in the United States, hoping that specialists there might offer insights his Canadian physicians cannot provide. The Mayo medical reports become part of the documented record, adding American medical expertise to the growing file of examinations and tests. Over 17 years following the encounter at Falcon Lake, Michalak spends an estimated $13,000 in 1967 currency values on medical care connected to his persistent symptoms. The financial burden compounds the physical suffering as he seeks answers that medical science seems unable to provide. The burns fade and return with frustrating irregularity. Chronic fatigue becomes his constant companion. Weight fluctuations continue. The burning sensations recur without warning. His physicians document these ongoing symptoms, noting their consistency with long-term radiation exposure effects, yet they can identify no source for such exposure beyond Michalak's own account of his encounter with the unknown craft. Researchers who examine the Falcon Lake case in subsequent decades recognize its unique position in the documentation of unidentified aerial phenomena. Chris Rutkowski and Grant Cameron, among others, analyze the available evidence and official documentation. They note that the case presents multiple layers of corroboration rarely found in such reports. Physical injury documented by multiple physicians, ground evidence confirmed by official investigators, radiation readings recorded by governmental agencies, soil samples showing heat effects beyond conventional explanation, and underlying it all, a single witness whose account remains consistent across years of investigation and whose physical suffering validates the reality of his experience in the most undeniable way possible. The craft that rose from the Falcon Lake clearing on May 20, 1967, left behind evidence that persists in official files, medical records, and the ongoing research of investigators who recognize the case's significance. Stefan Michalak carried the physical marks of his encounter for the remainder of his life. His son, Stan Michalak, continues to document the case and preserve his father's medical history for researchers and the public record. In the landscape of Canadian encounters with unexplained phenomena, the Falcon Lake incident stands as the reference case, the event whose documentation sets the standard for physical evidence and medical corroboration. A man went into the wilderness to prospect for minerals and returned with burns in a geometric pattern that medical science could document but not explain, suffered from symptoms consistent with radiation exposure whose source remained unidentified, and provided investigators with ground evidence that official agencies confirmed but could not attribute to any known technology or natural cause. The questions the case raises remain unanswered. The craft's origin, its purpose, the reason for its presence in that particular clearing on that particular day, these mysteries persist. What does not remain mysterious is the physical reality of what occurred. The evidence exists in medical files, official reports, and the documented suffering of one man who encountered something beyond his understanding and paid for that encounter with his health. If you found this case compelling, subscribe to Vanishing Roads for more documented paranormal investigations from around the world. This story was created with AI assistance based on documented case files. All events reference real investigations and reported incidents.